It was a bright, scorching afternoon in Lagos, the kind that made the streets feel like an oven. Traffic was a mess, as always, with honking cars, trotting okadas, and a general hustle that came with the pulse of the city. Somewhere in the middle of all that chaos, seated at a small plastic table under the shade of a busy street vendor's umbrella, sat a woman. Her face was weathered, skin wrinkled, but her eyes held the sharpness of someone who had lived through more hardship than most could ever imagine. Her name was Nosy. She was a widow, once married to a man who had promised her the world but left her with nothing but memories and a child to raise. That was 5 years ago. Since then, she had been navigating the streets of Lagos, scraping by day after day. The hunger, the rejection, the insults, all of it had become a part of her. Yet, through it all, her dignity remained unshaken. Nosy had seen men in suits and women in heels, walking past her as if she didn't exist. To them, she was just another face in the sea of poverty, someone they could ignore without any consequences. But today, something felt different. She had heard whispers, murmurs of a new restaurant opening on the outskirts of Lekki, one that was said to cater only to the elite. People were already talking about the owner, a man who had made his fortune in the tech industry. His name was Chijioke Okafor, and he was a billionaire. As she sat, lost in thought, she noticed a sleek black car pull up in front of the restaurant. It was shiny and polished, with tinted windows that shielded the inside from prying eyes. She had no idea who the occupant was, but the aura of wealth radiating from the car made her pause. She watched the door open, and out stepped a tall man, well dressed in an expensive suit, his gait confident and composed. This was Chijioke, the same man whose name she had heard being whispered in hushed tones around town. She watched him walk past, and something inside her stirred. Perhaps it was the hope, the foolish hope, that maybe, just maybe, someone could see her beyond the rags and dirt. Maybe, just maybe, today could be different. Without thinking much, Nosy stood up, the hunger gnawing at her stomach stronger than her pride. She walked towards the man, slowly at first, and then with more purpose. Her heart raced as she approached him. "Excuse me, sir," she called out, her voice shaky but determined. Chijioke stopped in his tracks, his head turning to face her. His eyes narrowed slightly, as though trying to assess who this woman was. The moment stretched on for a few seconds, long enough for Nosy to feel the weight of his gaze, but she didn't back down. She had come this far. She had to say what was on her mind. "Can I eat with you in the restaurant?" she asked, her words simple, direct, and laced with the desperation she felt inside. It was a question that would shock anyone who heard it. Who was she to ask a billionaire for such a thing? The moment seemed to freeze. The bustling noise of Lagos faded into the background as Chijioke looked at her with an unreadable expression. His well-groomed face showed no sign of irritation, but there was a hint of surprise in his eyes. "Eat with me?" he repeated slowly, his voice calm but tinged with disbelief. Nosy nodded, her hands trembling. She wasn't sure if she was doing the right thing, but the words had already left her lips. She didn't want to ask for money, didn't want to beg on the streets again. No, all she wanted, for once, was to sit at a table, to eat a meal that didn't come out of a plastic bag from a street vendor. She wanted to feel human again. Chijioke took a deep breath, glancing around at the curious onlookers who had gathered to watch the interaction. He could feel their eyes on him, the tension thick in the air. Most billionaires would have brushed off someone like Nosy in a heartbeat. But there was something about her, something that made him pause. You want to eat with me?" Chijioke asked again, this time his voice louder, as though trying to make sense of what he had just heard. He turned towards the entrance of the restaurant, and then back to her. Nosy didn't flinch. She didn't take a step back, even as people whispered and murmured, curious about this strange encounter. She stood tall, like a warrior preparing for battle. "Yes, sir," she answered simply. "I've heard your restaurant is the best in the city. I just want to eat something nice for once. Something that isn't from the streets." Chijioke looked at her for a long moment, a small frown appearing on his face. The world around him had always been one of luxury, and here she was, asking him for something so basic. Was it the desperation in her voice? Or was it something else? For a brief moment, he was struck by the idea that perhaps this was fate or some strange twist of destiny. "Follow me," he said, surprising everyone around him. Nosy blinked, unsure if she had heard him correctly. Follow him? Into the restaurant? She had never dared to dream of a day like this. The people around them watched in stunned silence as Chijioke led her past the grand entrance of the upscale restaurant. Nosy could feel the stares of disbelief from the crowd, but she walked with her head held high, the promise of a warm meal and the possibility of something more pushing her forward. As they entered the restaurant, the air seemed to shift. The plush interior, the elegant furniture, and the soft music playing in the background all felt so foreign to her. She had never set foot in a place like this before. Chijioke led her to a table, the staff immediately rushing to greet him with respectful bows. He gestured for Nosy to sit, his face unreadable. He had not yet spoken another word, but his actions were louder than anything. A few minutes later, a waiter came to take their order. Nosy was still in shock, trying to take in the beauty of the surroundings. She had never imagined herself in such a place. She had always considered herself invisible to people like Chijioke. But here she was, sitting with him in a restaurant meant for the elite. The waiter turned to Chijioke first. "What would you like to order, sir?" Chijioke's gaze shifted to Nosy, waiting for her to make the first move. "You may order first," he said quietly. Nosy looked down at the menu, her hands still trembling. She didn't know what to choose, but one thing was clear: this was a moment that would change her life forever. The weight of the menu in her hands felt like the weight of the world. Nosy had never seen food so expensive. The names on the menu were a foreign language to her: lobster thermidor, beef Wellington, foie gras. She felt like a fish out of water, not knowing what to pick, but knowing that whatever she ordered would be a choice far beyond what she could usually afford. The waiter stood at attention, eyes flicking between Nosy and Chijioke, his expression neutral but respectful. She could feel the tension in the air. Chijioke's eyes were on her, but he wasn't speaking, only waiting for her to make a choice. For a moment, Nosy considered ordering something modest. Perhaps some rice and beans, a simple dish that wouldn't draw too much attention. But the thought made her stomach churn. This wasn't just about food. This was an opportunity, one she didn't want to squander by asking for something too simple. She wanted to experience something more than the daily struggle. She wanted to be a part of a world she had only ever seen from the outside. With a trembling hand, she pointed to a dish at the top of the menu. "I'll have the lobster thermidor," she said, her voice wavering but strong. She wasn't sure why she picked it. Perhaps the name sounded fancy, or perhaps she was simply tired of always settling for less. She needed to feel like she belonged, even if only for a moment. The waiter nodded, an eyebrow raised in surprise at her choice, but he didn't comment. He quickly turned to Chijioke. "And for you, sir?" The waiter's tone was formal, but his eyes flicked nervously between the billionaire and the widow. Chijioke glanced at Nosy, his expression unreadable. He had seen people in all walks of life, but something about this moment felt different. It was as though they were both stepping into a new world, one that neither of them fully understood. The thought of sitting here, eating with her, made him feel uneasy, though he couldn't explain why. He pushed the thoughts aside, his usual confidence slipping back into place. "I'll have the same," he replied to the waiter, his voice smooth. "And bring us 2 glasses of your best wine." The waiter nodded again and disappeared into the kitchen, leaving Nosy and Chijioke alone at the table. A silence settled between them, an awkward one that was heavy with unspoken questions. Nosy couldn't help but glance at Chijioke from time to time. He was everything she had imagined him to be: a man of wealth, power, and status. His polished shoes, his tailored suit, the Rolex glinting on his wrist. To her, he was untouchable, a symbol of everything she had never had, but here they were, sharing a table. It didn't make sense. Chijioke shifted in his seat, leaning back slightly, as though trying to figure out how to approach this strange situation. He had encountered all kinds of people in his life: the rich, the powerful, the influential, but never anyone like Nosy. There was something about her that stirred a deep sense of discomfort in him. It wasn't pity, it wasn't charity, it was something else. Perhaps it was the quiet dignity with which she had asked to eat with him. Or maybe it was the vulnerability that lingered in her eyes, a vulnerability he recognized all too well. So Chijioke began, breaking the silence. "What's your story, Nosy?" Nosy blinked, caught off guard by the question. It wasn't often that someone of his stature would ask about her life. Most people looked at her and saw only a beggar, a homeless widow. She didn't expect Chijioke to be any different, but his tone wasn't dismissive. It wasn't condescending. It was genuine curiosity. She hesitated, unsure of how to answer. I'm a widow. My husband died 5 years ago. He left me with nothing but a child to raise. I used to sell fruits by the side of the road, but it hasn't been easy. The streets, they're not kind to people like me. Chijioke listened intently, his face serious as he processed her words. There was a quiet empathy in his eyes now, though it was still mixed with confusion. He could hardly imagine a life like hers, one where survival was a daily battle, where hope often felt like a distant dream. And your child? He asked, his voice softer now. She's fine, Nosy said, a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips. Her name is Amara. She's in school. I try my best to make sure she gets an education. She deserves better than I had. Chijioke nodded slowly, a strange knot tightening in his chest. Here was a woman, a mother, trying to hold it all together in a city that had no mercy. It was hard for him to understand, but it was also hard for him to ignore. The waiter returned moments later, bringing their meals and placing them delicately in front of them. The lobster thermidor was beautifully presented, steam rising from the dish like it had just come out of an oven in a Michelin-star restaurant. No guy's stomach growled loudly, but she forced herself to be composed. She picked up her fork carefully, cutting into the lobster, the rich aroma filling the air. She took a bite, and her eyes widened in surprise. It was unlike anything she had ever tasted before, so tender, so flavorful, so exquisite. For a moment, all of her worries seemed to disappear. She could taste the luxury, the richness of the meal, and it was overwhelming. Across from her, Chijioke ate in silence, his gaze shifting to her every now and then. He noticed how she savored every bite, how she was completely lost in the experience of eating something so fine. There was no pretension about her, no attempt to fit in. She was simply a woman trying to enjoy the moment. And in that moment, he began to understand something he hadn't before. They were both hungry. But while she was hungry for food, he was hungry for something deeper, something more profound. He didn't know what that was yet, but he could feel it gnawing at him from the inside. Finally, after a long stretch of silence, Chijioke spoke again. "Why did you ask to eat with me?" Nosy paused, taking a moment to gather her thoughts. Before answering, "I've seen men like you all my life," she said quietly, looking down at her plate. "Men who have everything. And I've seen women like me, women who have nothing. But I wanted to know what it felt like to sit at the same table, to be treated like a human being, just for once. I don't need your money, Chijioke. I just needed to feel equal." Her words hit him harder than he expected, leaving him speechless for a moment. He hadn't realized that by simply sharing a meal, he had given her something that money could never buy. Dignity. As the meal went on, the conversation drifted from one topic to another. Nosy spoke of her life, her struggles, and the dreams she still held onto. Chijioke listened, occasionally offering thoughts, but mostly just absorbing her story, her resilience. By the time dessert arrived, something had shifted between them. The billionaire and the widow were no longer two strangers from different worlds. In that moment, they were simply two people, sharing an experience. The bill came, and Nosy began to reach for her purse, but Chijioke stopped her with a hand. "I've got this," he said firmly, his voice decisive. Nosy hesitated, but didn't argue. She wasn't used to such generosity, especially from someone like him. As they left the restaurant, stepping back into the harsh sunlight of the streets, Nosy felt something stir inside her, a flicker of hope. Maybe this wasn't just a one-off kindness. Maybe this was the beginning of something more. But as Chijioke turned to walk away, he called after her, his voice heavy with thought. "Wait, Nosy." She turned, surprised. "Let me help you," he said, the words coming out slowly, as if he had been wrestling with them. Nogai's heart raced as she turned to face Chijioke, her eyes searching his face for any sign that he was joking. But there was no jest in his eyes, only a quiet seriousness that unsettled her. "Help me?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper, as though afraid she might misunderstand him. Chijioke stood there, his posture relaxed, yet there was an intensity in his gaze that made it clear he wasn't backing down. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice calm, yet with a firm edge. "You don't need to keep struggling. There's more to you than this, more to what you can do, what you've had to survive through. It's not right." Nosy took a step back, shaking her head. "I don't need charity. I didn't ask for your help. I'm not offering charity," Chijioke replied quickly, his expression serious. "I'm offering an opportunity, a way for you to get ahead, something to change the course of your life, if you're willing." Nosy swallowed hard, her throat tight. She could feel her stomach twist with doubt and confusion. Was he serious? Could this really be happening? A man like Chijioke, someone with so much power and wealth, offering her an opportunity. It didn't seem real, but the longer she stared at him, the more she saw that he wasn't just throwing words around. He was offering something real. But why? Why her? I don't understand, she said, her voice shaking, her hands still trembling. Why would you help me? What do I have to offer you? Chijioke exhaled slowly, taking a step toward her. I've seen people like you all my life, he said, his tone quiet, but the weight of his words unmistakable. People who are stuck. People who have potential, but life has beaten them down so much they can't see it anymore. I'm offering you a way to rise above it, to change the narrative. He paused, allowing his words to sink in before continuing. I can give you the resources, the connections, even a job if that's what you want. But I need you to trust me. Nosy stood still, her mind racing. There was a war raging inside her. On one hand, the thought of having a way out, of not having to struggle every day, was tempting beyond measure. A chance to give Amra the life she deserved, a life without the burden of constant fear and uncertainty. But on the other hand, there was something deeply unsettling about trusting someone like Kijioke.it wasn't the generosity. No, she had seen people give before, usually when it suited them. It was his sudden interest in her. Why her? What was it that made her so special? To him, she could already hear the voices in her head, the voices of caution that warned her against getting too close to people with so much power. She had seen the dark side of Lagos, the manipulation, the games people played, but as she looked at Chijioke, something in her gut told her that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't like the others. Maybe he really did want to help. I'm not sure I can trust you, she said softly, her eyes locking with his. I've seen too many men promise help, only to leave you stranded when it's convenient for them. Chijioke nodded as if he understood. I get it, I do, but I'm not asking for your trust right away. All I'm asking for is a chance to show you that there are people in this world who really want to help, without any strings attached. No, guys. Mind churned as she stood there, caught between doubt and the possibility of a better life. But deep down, she knew she couldn't keep living the way she had been. Her pride was one thing, but her daughter's future was another. I'll think about it, she said finally, the words tasting foreign on her tongue. She had never imagined herself standing here, talking to a man who could change her life in the blink of an eye. But I need time. I need to be sure. Chijioke's expression softened, and he nodded. Of course, take your time. But know that the offer stands. Whenever you're ready, just let me know. The next few days were a blur for Nosy. She couldn't stop thinking about the conversation, the offer Chijioke had made. She tried to go about her usual routine, selling small snacks at the market, looking after Amara, doing the best she could to get by. But the thought of what could be kept pulling her back, like an invisible thread tied around her heart. What if she accepted? What if she took that leap of faith? It was a terrifying thought, one that kept her awake late at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering if she could trust this man. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that her life, her daughter's life, wasn't going to change unless she took some kind of risk. She decided to talk to Amara to get her daughter's thoughts. After all, Amara was the reason Nosy kept fighting. If this was going to be a decision that changed everything, she needed to know if it was worth it. Amara, Nosy began that evening, after dinner, as they sat together on their small bed. I met someone today. A man who says he can help us. He's a billionaire and he's offering me a chance to work with him. Amara looked up from her homework, her wide eyes locking with her mother's. A billionaire? Like the ones on TV? Yes, Nosy said with a small smile. But more importantly, he's offering a way for me to get a real job. A job that could change our lives. Is he nice? Amara asked, her voice innocent, yet full of the wisdom she had gained from years of living with struggle. Nosy hesitated. I think he is, but I don't know him that well. I'm not sure if I can trust him yet. Amara placed her pencil down and looked at her mother with a serious expression, one that felt too wise for a girl her age. You always told me that you wanted the best for me, Mama. Maybe this is the chance we've been waiting for. Her words hit Nosy harder than she expected. She had always tried to shield Amara from the pain and hardships of life, but here, her daughter was willing to take a chance on something she couldn't fully understand. Maybe you're right, Nosy whispered, her heart heavy with the weight of the decision ahead of her. Maybe it's time to trust. The next morning, as the sun rose over the city of Lagos, Nosy found herself walking toward Chijoke's office, the weight of her decision settling in her chest. Today, she would make the call. Today, she would decide if she was going to step into a new life, and as she approached the towering building, she took a deep breath, ready for whatever lay ahead. Lagos was as busy as ever, but for Nosy, the world around her had slowed down to a crawl. Her footsteps were heavy, her heart pounding in her chest as she walked towards the towering skyscraper that housed Chijoke's office. The building was pristine, modern, with glass walls reflecting the sun's harsh light. It stood as a testament to everything she had never been able to reach: wealth, power, success. The entrance was guarded by security, men in sharp suits who watched every passerby with a keen eye. Nosy hesitated for a moment, then squared her shoulders and walked in. She had no idea what this moment would lead to, but she knew she couldn't turn back. For Amara's sake, for her own, she had to take this step. As she approached the front desk, a receptionist in a sleek black dress smiled up at her. "Good morning. How may I assist you?" Nogai's voice wavered, but she held her ground. "I'm here to see Mr. Chijoke Okafor." The receptionist's smile didn't falter, but there was a slight raise of her eyebrows as she typed into her computer. "Do you have an appointment?" Nosy shook her head. "No, but he knows me. I met him recently." A moment of silence passed as the receptionist checked her system, clearly trying to figure out how to process the request. Finally, she looked back up with a polite smile. "Please take a seat. I'll let him know you're here," Nosy thanked her quietly, her heart thudding loudly in her chest as she took a seat in the waiting area. She looked around at the plush interior, soft leather chairs, art on the walls, the smell of fresh coffee in the air. It was all so far removed from the life she had known, a world where the everyday was a struggle to survive. The receptionist disappeared behind a door, leaving Nosy alone with her thoughts. She had made her decision, but now that she was here, it felt real in a way it hadn't before. Would Chijoke truly follow through? Would he offer her something that could change her life forever? Or would it all be another illusion? It didn't matter, she told herself. What mattered now was that she had taken the chance. She could at least say she had tried. For Amara, for herself, a few minutes passed before the door to the back office opened and Chijoke stepped out. He was dressed in a sharp suit, his face calm and composed, but there was something different about him today. His usual businesslike air seemed to be softened by something deeper. He smiled when he saw her sitting there. "Nosy," he said warmly, his voice genuine. "I'm glad you came." She stood up slowly, nodding, unsure of how to respond. Her hands were shaking, but she forced herself to speak. "I've thought about your offer, and I'm ready to take that step." Chijoke's eyes softened. "Are you sure?" "Yes," she said, her voice stronger now. "I'm ready." He smiled, the warmth in his gaze reaching her. "Good. I'm glad you've made this decision. Come with me. Let's talk." He led her through the sleek corridors of the building, past offices that were quiet but filled with the hum of productivity. The contrast between the clean, organized space and the chaotic life she had known was overwhelming. She had always felt like an outsider, like she didn't belong in places like this. But today, that was changing. They reached a large conference room, and Chijoke gestured for her to sit across from him. As she did, he took a seat as well, his eyes locking with hers. "I want to help you, Nosy," he said, his voice sincere. "But it's not just about giving you a job. It's about giving you a future, a real chance to rise above your circumstances. I've seen the strength in you. I know you have what it takes." Nosy swallowed hard. It wasn't easy to accept help, to believe that someone who had so much to offer would genuinely want to see her succeed. But Chijoke's words were different. He wasn't offering her charity, he was offering her a path. "I've arranged for you to start working in one of my companies. You'll be given training, mentorship, and a position where you can prove yourself. It won't be easy, but nothing in life worth having ever is," he said, his voice steady, as though he had said these words to many others before. She felt her throat tighten with emotion, but she forced herself to stay composed. "I don't know how to thank you, Chijoke. I don't even know if I'm ready for this." "You are," he said simply. "It's not about being ready. It's about taking the first step. You've already done that. Now you just need to trust the process." Nosy nodded, taking a deep breath. She had to believe him. She had to trust that this was more than just another fleeting offer. "I'll give it everything I have," she said quietly, her voice filled with determination. Chijoke smiled. "I know you will. That's why I believe in you." For the next hour, they talked about logistics, her new role, the training she would undergo, and how she could transition into her new life. Chijioke explained everything with clarity, making sure she understood every step. It wasn't just a job. It was a fresh start, a chance to build something of her own, a chance to finally leave behind the life she had known for so long. As they wrapped up the meeting, Chijioke stood up and extended his hand toward her. "Welcome aboard, Nosy." For the first time in years, Nosy felt a sense of something she hadn't dared to feel for a long time: hope. It wasn't just hope for herself. It was hope for Emira, for a future where she could be more than a widow scraping by on the streets. It was a future where she could stand tall, not just as a survivor, but as someone who had truly made it. The days that followed were a whirlwind. Nosy threw herself into her new role with an intensity that surprised even her. The work was challenging, but it was exactly what she needed. She felt alive in a way she hadn't in years, like she was finally contributing to something bigger than herself. The training, the long hours, the constant learning, everything felt like a new chapter in her life. At home, Emira noticed the change too. Her mother no longer came home exhausted, defeated by the daily grind. Instead, Nosy came home with stories of what she had learned, and Emira could see the spark in her mother's eyes again. One evening, after a particularly long day, Nosy sat down at the dinner table, a tired smile on her face as Emira set down a plate of food in front of her. "Mum, you look different," Emira said, her voice full of wonder. "Like you're actually happy." Nosy looked at her daughter, her heart full. "I am, Emira. I really am." It wasn't just the job that had changed her, it was the belief that there was something better out there, that there was always the possibility of change, of growth, if you had the courage to take that first step. And as she sat there, with her daughter beside her, she knew one thing for certain: this was just the beginning.